All right, we're going to talk about photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, if you look at just the root words within the word photosynthesis, photo means what? Light, yep. And synthesis means to make or to create. To synthesize means to make or create. So we're making or creating something with light. What are we creating? What do plants do with light? They make food. They make energy. So they make different carbohydrates with this light energy. And we're going to kind of study that process together because it's really the foundation of life. If we don't have plants to trap this energy from the sun that we can't use, we wouldn't survive, right? So the base of the food chain are the plants. They grab the energy from the sun, turn it into something that's usable that we can eat, and then we eat the plants and we eat the animals that eat the plants, and everybody survives. So it all starts with the sun, sunlight energy. So we can also grow plants indoors, obviously, right? So as long as we have the visible light spectrum, we can grow plants. And there's certain wavelengths of light that plants do better with than others, and we're going to talk about that. So the structure, the specific organelle that plants have that animal cells don't are these chloroplasts. So specifically where photosynthesis takes place is in the chloroplasts, and it needs the help of chlorophyll, which is a pigment that helps to capture the light's energy and start this process of photosynthesis. So what parts of the plant are green that contain chloroplasts? A lot of chloroplasts. The leaves, yeah. So specifically, where does photosynthesis take place? It takes place in the leaves, in the chloroplasts, within those cells that make up the leaf. And there's other structures in the leaf that we're going to look at that contribute to photosynthesis, and we'll see how those structures do that. So it takes the sunlight's energy, turns it into a sugar. In this case, the simplest sugar is glucose. And in the process, they release oxygen as a waste product. Well, lucky for us, right? Because we need oxygen for us to break down our food energy. So what does the plant need to undergo photosynthesis then? Sunlight, we already mentioned. And what are the other two things we can see go into the chloroplast? Water and carbon dioxide. Well, that works out well because we have plenty of carbon dioxide to contribute, right, when we exhale. Actually, there's a little bit too much carbon dioxide in the environment, right, because of the emissions from our vehicles and factories. So talked about the carbon footprint, right, that we all make as individuals that we can work on a little bit. But in animal cells, we have this organelle called mitochondria that you already know about from studying cell structure, and that is for us to make energy, right? These are the energy. They're the powerhouse of the cell. So what they do is they take sugar and oxygen and turn it into energy, and the energy that we use, the usable energy, that molecule is called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So that's what our cells need. That's the gas for our cells is ATP to keep us going. So to contract our muscles, your muscle cells need ATP. For our neurons and our nerve cells to work and perform their functions to drive our body, that they all need ATP. So we can't get ATP unless we have lots of mitochondria using glucose and oxygen to create that ATP. So the chloroplasts provide the glucose and the oxygen. We use that in our mitochondria to make this ATP, and then we release in our exhale carbon dioxide and water, which again the chloroplasts take in with the help of sunlight to produce glucose and oxygen. So it's this continuous cycle, this relationship between animal and plant cells giving each other what they need through the waste products of breaking down our energy. So it really is a nice relationship and works well. But if we have things going on in our environment like deforestation and urbanization occurring, we're starting to lose one of the major contributors of life, and that's our plants, right? So we really have to be thoughtful as we navigate our world and live on this earth. When you vote, right? When you go to vote in the voting booth, you have to look at what people are planning, and different communities are going to have different like special what we call referendums. A referendum is a special vote on a topic that's unique to your community. And sometimes it might be, like here in La Crosse, there was a big one where we were going to run a highway through the marsh. We were going to get rid of a large portion of the marsh and try to decrease the traffic jam getting into downtown La Crosse. And we all know that is a problem, right? Highway 16, Highway 35 into La Crosse is a real pain, and it's getting, as more and more people are moving into the area, Holman's really building up. A ton of homes are going out in Holman. People are moving to there, and they're working in downtown La Crosse at the hospitals and the universities and here at Western. It's creating a problem. So we're trying to spread that out, and then that failed. People said, no, we're not going to damage the marsh. The marsh does huge things for the environment. Not going to happen. Right now, there's another issue. They want to create a trail going up into Hickson Forest, and it's going to interfere with some neighborhood homes as they build that trail. So there's a lot of people screaming and shouting, no, 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 it's a bad thing. We don't want our homes to be destroyed. Privacy. We're going to have these mountain bikes and these people, running by on the trails. So that's another issue. So you have to think about what's the impact of that. So as you kind of get a more environmental awareness, maybe some of you are already environmentally aware, but sometimes we can think of, so these families are talking about the lack of privacy, but what is the benefit of exposing people to the Hickson Forest? What do you think? What is the benefit of making it easier to access Hickson Forest? Exactly, yeah. When you expose people to the beauty of nature, do they value it more? So when something happens and they're going to say we're going to take part of Hickson Forest down and we're going to turn it into a parking lot, somebody might say, well, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So by getting people exposure to preserves and parks and things, you try to build an awareness. So it's that balance. And like I said, you just have to have a little. That's why we like people to be educated. Not that you're all going to go on and be biology majors, but when you're out there managing your businesses, some of you, if we fast forward 10, 15 years, you're going to be managers and leaders in your environments, and having this knowledge is going to help you say, hey, well, maybe we don't want to do that because we got to think of the environmental impact. Because when I took biology, we talked about this stuff, and I know it exists. Because the eyes can't see what the brain doesn't know, right? If you don't know these things exist, you're not going to see it in the environment. For example, if you're driving through the countryside and it's all farm field, rolling farm fields in the middle of the summer, you could say, wow, isn't this beautiful? Well, it is beautiful to a point. Is there a lot of biodiversity in rolling farm fields? How many species of plants are there in those acres and acres and acres? One. We call that a monoculture. If I look at the marsh, are there more species in that marsh of different organisms? For sure, lots of biodiversity. So do we need to feed our people though? Farm fields are important, yes. But they're doing some really cool things with farming. They're taking places like Chicago. If you look at Chicago, and we stayed at a hotel that was really high in the air, and I could see all these gardens on top of buildings. Isn't that a great idea? I mean, what do we do on top of our rooftops? Nothing, right? They just sit there. What a great exposure to sun, no shade up there, right, to worry about killing off your garden. As long as you can provide the water, that's a great spaces to grow food in the city. So if you ever move to the city, you can have a garden, and they have them on top of the roofs. Question? Or just? Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, less predation, and yeah, she's talking about bee colonies. A lot of people are doing that as a hobby. So yeah, so we have this intricate relationship between plants and animals that we really need to preserve and respect. And a majority of photosynthesis happens where? Do you know? What organisms are in charge of a majority of our photosynthesis, starting the base of the food chain? Any ideas? Any guesses? Very good. Yeah, algae. Algae, and where do we find the algae? In water, in water. So is the marsh important for photosynthesis here in La Crosse? Yeah, Yeah, but there's even bigger waterways where algae are important in our oceans, right? So again, that's more awareness. We need to protect our waters. They're the #1 source for photosynthesis for the world is algae. And again, they process this extra carbon dioxide that we're putting out in the environment, so they also are good for cleaning the environment and keeping our air clear. So we need energy from these plants. We call plants autotrophs. Auto means self, so they can make the food themselves. They don't need an outside source. As long as they have chloroplasts and chlorophyll, they can take in that sunlight energy and turn it into sugar. So photoautotrophs means they use light to produce food. So plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, which are kind of a cross between algae and bacteria. So there are other organisms that can make their own energy with things that are not food or sunlight. We call those chemoautotrophs. So that's why we say photoautotrophs, because there are chemoautotrophs. And that's the group of organisms we call the archaea. They live deep in the sulfur beds, and they can turn chemicals like sulfur into energy. But we're not going to talk about them right now. That's later. So just know autotrophs are producers, so they produce the energy, and heterotrophs consume the energy made by the producers. So again, algae are #1 when it comes to photosynthesis and producing the oxygen needed for life. And heterotrophs are what we are. We have to get our energy from eating other organisms. So we digest the food, and then we use a special process called cellular respiration to make ATP. So this process here is photosynthesis, is what occurs in the chloroplasts, and cellular respiration is what occurs in the mitochondria. So we can predict the formula. The formula for photosynthesis is water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight yields glucose and oxygen. And then cellular respiration is glucose and oxygen yields water and carbon dioxide and ATP. So do plant cells have mitochondria? We looked at that already, right? Last time. Yeah, they do. So plant cells undergo photosynthesis. They can make energy, but then they use that energy through cellular respiration in the mitochondria. So plant cells have both. They can do photosynthesis and cellular respiration because they have both of those organelles. So they make the sugar and they use it to grow, right? They have to grow and get larger, so they need energy to do that, and they use cellular respiration to do that part. But animal cells only have mitochondria for energy production. They don't have chloroplasts, so we need a continuous source of energy, and that's in the food that we eat around us. So make sure you know the term autotroph, heterotroph, producers, consumers. So this occurs in the leaves. Again, here's the complete formula for photosynthesis. It's carbon dioxide and water using light energy to make glucose and oxygen gas. So if I look at this plant here, which is called Alodia, it's a great plant for use in the lab, and we used to use it a lot, but some not very smart science teachers would buy these, buy sprigs, bunches of this Alodia water plant and use it for their labs, and then they were done. Oh, we have all this beautiful plant left. I don't want to just throw it in the garbage. I'll go throw it in the stream behind the school, or I'll throw it in the stream behind my house. Well, this is an invasive species, so it's really great to grow in the lab and look at in the lab, but you don't throw it in the waterways because then it was taking over natural plants in the waterways and killing them off. So now you can't buy this anymore because people were being irresponsible with it. Now there's a weaker type that has a skinnier leaf, and it's not as easy to study. We're still going to use it, but it's not as good. I have to go to Marine Land and get it. But yep, yeah. They give us the thinner kind that's not invasive, so we can use that, but it's not nearly as good as the broadleaf. This is the broadleaf Alodia. It's kind of frustrating. But so what are these bubbles on the surface of the plant? If you look at the equation up there, what are the bubbles? Well, bubbles are in soda. That's a gas that's trapped in a liquid. because this is underwater. This plant you're looking at right here is underwater. So there's little bubbles that are being produced on the leaf. What is in that bubble? Mm-hmm. Yes, oxygen. And we're going to mimic next week when we come to lab, you're going to actually do a little experiment where we're going to create oxygen gas, and we're going to measure that over time. So this is oxygen gas being produced on the surface of these leaves. So where does it take place? In the green portion of our plants, in the mesophyll, which is a tissue in the leaf that has chloroplasts. So we need water and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis to take place. The water comes from the roots. So it comes through these water channels that run up from the roots through the stem to the leaves. Those water channels are called xylem. X-Y-L-E-M is xylem, like xylophone, right? Starts with an X, but has a Z sound. So xylem carries the water up the roots to the leaves. Carbon dioxide enters through these little spaces in the leaf called stomata. So they open and close depending on if it's going to be a photosynthetic day or not. So when would we expect to see stomata on a leaf open up? What kind of weather exists outside? Yeah, on a sunny day, we'd expect to see these stomata. So here's the leaf. So this is the top surface of the leaf. The cuticle protects the leaf from water loss, so it's kind of a waxy layer, so we don't have a lot of evaporation off of our leaf where we lose too much water. And then here's the upper epidermis. These are plant cells, just like the plant cells we saw in lab. So we saw, you know, the typical plant cell in lab. That's what these are. And then those green structures inside are what? The chloroplasts. Yep, this is what they look like. So if we zoom in on one of these little green dots here, this is what that chloroplast looks like on the inside. So here's the stomata. So they're on the underside of the leaf. They're little holes that open up. And carbon dioxide enters, because we need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, so that's how carbon dioxide gets in. It comes in through the stomata on the underside of the leaf, and then as oxygen gas is produced, it leaves through the stomata. So gas exchange is what happens through the stomata. So stoma is just kind of a general term that we use for a hole or an opening. Like when people can't breathe on their own, and we can't, you know, give them air through the trachea, or through the upper airway, the larynx, we make a hole below that. Maybe you've seen people that have like a line right here from stitches that at some point in their lives they had to get an artificial airway going down here. We call that a stoma. Or people that have had their larynx removed from tobacco chewing or smoking cigarettes, they remove the larynx and then they have a speaking valve where they have to talk through a stoma, and that's difficult. Well, you can't talk through a stoma, but they have to plug the stoma to push the air up if they have any larynx left. I've taken care of patients that have had that, and definitely don't recommend smoking or chewing tobacco because it's usually young men that I've taken care of that have had those cancers. Okay, so that's the opening to the leaf. This is the leaf vein. So vein is what carries water from the roots to the leaves, just like we have veins that carry our blood, right, from all over the body. So it comes in through here. So that's where the water comes in. And then here's our chloroplast. So some special structures within the chloroplast that you need to know is that we have the fluid space. The fluid space inside here, kind of like the cytoplasm of a cell, but remember this is just an organelle, so within a cell. So the fluid space we call the stroma. So stroma is fluid space inside this chloroplast, and there's special reactions that occur in there that we're going to study. And then the membranes, these stacked membranes, the membrane itself is called the thylakoid. So the thylakoid is an important part where specific parts of photosynthesis take place that we're going to talk about. And then a stack of thylakoids we call a granum. So a stack of them is called a granum. Just like you have a deck of cards, this is a granum of thylakoids. So stacked thylakoids on top of one another is a granum. Okay, so now we know a little bit about leaf anatomy and kind of how that all works. Now we'll look at some specific reactions that occur, and it has a lot to do with hydrogen. What happens is when out in the stroma, out in the fluid, there are enzymes that help the reaction of taking a glucose molecule and splitting it into 2 molecules of pyruvic acid. And in that process, we add a phosphate to ATP, but we remove hydrogens and add it to a special coenzyme called NAD+. So this is, now we're jumping to a lot of chemistry, right? And it's like, whoa, where are we going with this? This is just I don't want to go into a lot of detail with this, but I just want you to understand the role of hydrogens, because hydrogen, do you know what atomic number hydrogen is in the periodic table? Number 1. So how many electrons does it have? 1. 1 electron and 1 proton, right? 1 electron and 1 proton. So sometimes in science, like in biology, when we need electrons or we need protons, we just steal hydrogen off of molecules because it has 1 electron, 1 proton. So when you think of hydrogen, think of electrons or protons. So in this case, when something loses electrons, we could just be stealing a hydrogen atom from it. So in this case, in this reaction, glucose, we're stealing hydrogens from glucose. We're just taking some hydrogens off. How many are we taking off? 2. So we create 2 NADH plus, 2 NADH, sorry, and then we have 2 protons left over because we stole a hydrogen, or I'm sorry, we stole an electron from hydrogen, so we have 2 hydrogen atoms that have the proton but no electron, so that's why we say H plus. So when we remove hydrogens from something, we say it's oxidized. So when something is the opposite direction, when we gain electrons or hydrogen atoms, we say that that molecule is reduced. So we lose electrons, we're reducing something. So if this, I'm sorry, gaining electrons. So NAD plus is reduced because it gained hydrogen atoms. And glucose was oxidized because it lost electrons and gave it to NADH. And then we create this molecule called pyruvic acid, which is an important molecule on its way to becoming ATP. But the biggest concept with this is just knowing that we have to pick up energy in the form of electrons early in the process when we're undergoing photosynthesis. So when glucose is going to be converted to carbon dioxide, because what's the formula for glucose? Yep. So if I remove a bunch of hydrogens from glucose, what am I left with? If I remove 12 hydrogens from glucose, what am I left with? Carbon and oxygen, right? Which is CO2. Okay, so we're taking all the hydrogens off of the glucose, and all we're left with is carbon and oxygen, which is CO2. So that's where we get this process of, again, losing electrons or reducing it. Okay, so where was I here? Okay, so carbon dioxide loses hydrogen atoms to become carbon dioxide. And oxygen is going to gain hydrogen atoms to become water. Lots of water molecules. So it's not just one water molecule. Okay? So these reactions, when we talk about moving hydrogen atoms, We remove it from one to add it to another. So these always occur in pairs. We call them oxidation reduction reactions. So again, another way to remember this is, I'll write it on the thing here. If I lose electrons, which again is the same thing as hydrogen, we call that oxidation, right? And if I gain electrons, which is what's going to happen, if some molecule is losing it, another one's going to gain it. If I gain electrons, we call that reduction. So they happen in pairs. So a way to remember this is Leo the lion goes grr. Leo, lose electrons, oxidation. Grr, gain electrons, reduction. Okay? And again, the electrons are what again? Hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen atoms. So this is just a little fundamental concept that we're going to see applied as we watch this process of photosynthesis. All right. So to reduce this carbon dioxide, energy is needed. So when we lose electrons, so if we look at this process here, so we're talking about, what is this? This is a sugar. We're going to remove hydrogens from it. We're going to add it to this coenzyme, which is NAD. It's going to carry these electrons, so we gain energy. So a loss of energy is oxidation. A gain of energy is reduction. So you can also look at that here. Gain of energy, reduction, loss of energy, oxidation. Lose electrons, oxidation, gain electrons, reduction. So it refers to energy, because electrons are what are spinning around outside the nucleus, right? Those are the energy whenever we create bonds, right? It's like ionic bonds. We're moving electrons from one atom to another. So we call NADH plus then, it's carrying electrons in this molecule. So it picks up electrons. So let's start with this first process then. So we need energy and water. How does water come in again? To the cell? Through the vein, through those xylem, those vessels, okay? So this is the chloroplast, so that water passes through the membrane of the chloroplast and starts what we call the light reactions. So the light reactions occur in the thylakoid membranes, and then the other process occurs in the stroma, and that's called the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, and the light reactions occur in the thylakoid membranes. So the Calvin cycle uses carbon dioxide. So this is the first step. We're going to take this carbon dioxide and we're going to turn it into sugar. So how do we do that? Well, we need the light reactions to make, that carries electrons from this NADPH, which is another carrier that we're going to talk about. And that's going to start our process. So the light reactions require sunlight. So they're in the thylakoid membrane. And the Calvin cycle reactions do not require light. They only use carbon dioxide. So there's two linked reactions. We have the Calvin cycle and the light reactions. The Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, and the light reactions occur in the thylakoid membrane. So they're paired reactions requiring this transfer of energy. All right, so let's start with a little background information. So visible light is in the wavelength of 380 to 750 nanometers. That's just visible light. It's just the white light that we see in the environment right now. Contains different pigments, the chloroplast does, and chlorophyll is good at absorbing different parts of visible light. And chlorophyll is green because the color that we see is what's reflected back on us when we look at light and how we see color. For example, your red sweatshirt is reflecting red and absorbing the other colors of visible light. What are the colors of visible light? Does everybody remember the little mnemonic for that? Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, right? Those are the colors of the rainbow, right? If we have a prism, we can split visible light into the spectrum. Those are the different colors. So chlorophyll is green. It reflects back that color. It absorbs reds and blues. So that's what is absorbed and used. So here's visible light. This is just the electromagnetic spectrum. Gamma rays contain a lot of energy. These are dangerous, right? That damages tissues, body tissues. And then we have X-rays, UV light, infrared, microwaves, radio waves. So photosynthesis uses the blue and red portion of the light spectrum and reflects green. Chlorophyll B is another pigment that we see in plants. It reflects a yellowish green. And carotenoids absorb blue and green and reflect yellow and orange. So you can think of some of those other plants that you're aware of that are that color, yellow-orange plants. But again, they're all absorbing what color of the spectrum? All three, regardless. They're all absorbing blue. So they're using that, right? That blue portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. And then reflecting these. So these colors are not used in the spectrum for photosynthesis. So there's energy in light. So the energy in light, the little particles of light, we call photons. So photons are energized particles of light that are absorbed by chlorophyll. Make sure you know the word photon. The light that we're talking about, the blue portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, those are particles of light which we call photons. And that's what's absorbed by the pigments, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B and the carotenoids. So they absorb these photons, and that's what kicks off photosynthesis. We've got to have the light to start the process of photosynthesis. So in these photons are electrons. In these pigments are electrons that are energized when light hits them. And I have a really good animation we're going to watch in detail when we come back on Thursday to put this all kind of like, oh, that's what this is about. I get it. Hopefully you get it when you watch this animation. We're going to fill out a little worksheet together as we do it. But it's important to just at least identify some of the fundamental parts. So we have these light particles that are striking the leaf, and the leaf in the chloroplast contains chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll is energized when these photons strike it. So what we find in the thylakoid membrane are these photosystems, which we're going to look at here. So here's a chlorophyll pigment molecule. And when photons of light strike it, it transfers electrons to a higher energy level. And I think before we get in any more detail, because we're going to have to understand that a little better and then watch it in an animation, we'll pick this up on Thursday. But just understand that photons are particles of light, and they are going to energize chlorophyll pigments in the leaf. And we'll pick up in the next video with how that happens.